You know this face. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, the man who saved the Union. His story feels like it's carved in stone. But that's not the story we're telling today. This is the story of a leader on the verge of collapse. A man staring down a string of devastating failures, cycling through generals who just couldn't win, and who privately admitted he wasn't good enough for the job. Everyone knows Lincoln the victor, but few know how his greatest defeats, in politics, in battle, and in his own heart, became the very blueprint for his most enduring victory. This is that untold story. But this relentless schooling in failure was forging a leader with an incredible capacity for patience and empathy, two things the nation would desperately need. He lost his mother at just 9 years old, and his sister died in childbirth a decade later. His formal schooling was practically non-existent, maybe a year in total. He was a self-taught man, building his mind from borrowed books by the dim light of a frontier fire. When he set out to make his own way as a young man, he failed almost immediately. At 23, he and a partner bought a general store on credit. But Lincoln was more interested in devouring books in the back than in turning a profit. The business quickly tanked. And when his partner died, Lincoln, already earning his Honest Abe nickname, insisted on shouldering the entire debt, a crushing burden he called his national debt that took him more than a decade to repay. The very same year his business went under, he ran for the Illinois state legislature and lost. Defeated, in debt, and out of a job, his ambition must have felt like a cruel joke. He eventually won a seat, but the losses kept piling up. He was defeated in bids for Speaker of the state legislature, for U.S. Congress, and was even rejected for a government land officer position. He ran for the U.S. Senate twice and lost both times, most famously in 1858 to his great rival Stephen Douglas. These public defeats were matched by deep personal grief. The death of his first love, Anne Rutledge, sent him into a depression so severe his friends hid his razors, fearing he'd take his own life. He suffered from what was then called melancholy, a darkness that would follow him for the rest of his life. This wasn't just a string of bad luck. It was a defining pattern. By the time he was 50, Lincoln's resume had more losses than wins. It looked like his destiny was to be a forgotten footnote in Illinois politics. This was his ultimate failure staring him in the face, not just losing an election, but losing the country itself. His greatest frustration during the Civil War wasn't just the enemy, it was the infuriating performance of his own generals. He first pinned his hopes on George B. McClellan, a man who was a genius at organizing but paralyzed by caution. McClellan built a magnificent army but then refused to use it, constantly overestimating the enemy and demanding more supplies. Lincoln's frustration was boiling over. He once wrote to a friend with biting sarcasm, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it for a time." Another time he quipped that sending reinforcements to McClellan was like shoveling fleas across a barnyard, not half of them get there. In one unbelievable moment, Lincoln went to McClellan's home to talk strategy, only for the general to show up, ignore him, and go straight to bed. Yet Lincoln, swallowing his pride, said he would gladly hold McClellan's horse if it would just bring a victory. McClellan was just the first in a frustrating parade of commanders. General John Pope was completely routed at the Second Battle of Bull Run. General Ambrose Burnside led his men into a slaughter at Fredericksburg. General Joseph Hooker was totally outmaneuvered at Chancellorsville, a loss so stunning that when Lincoln heard the news, he just paced the room, repeating, my God, what will the country say?" The most agonizing moment, though, came after the victory at Gettysburg in July 1863. General George Meade had defeated Lee's army, but then he let the battered Confederates slip away across the Potomac River. Lincoln was devastated. He saw the end of the war in his grasp, only to watch it disappear. In a raw, emotional letter to Meade, he wrote, "My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. To have closed upon him would have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely." The man who had been rejected by voters so many times was now trying to build a peace on forgiveness, while his opponents demanded punishment. The man who had been broken by loss and rejected by voters developed a profound empathy and an iron-willed patience that became his most powerful weapons. That patience, learned from a bankrupt business and a decade of lost elections, is what allowed him to endure general after disappointing general. While others panicked, Lincoln waited, watched, and learned. That patience finally paid off when he found a general who shared his vision, Ulysses S. Grant. Others were horrified by Grant's reputation as a butcher who tolerated high casualties, but Lincoln saw a fighter. When a delegation came to demand Grant's removal, Lincoln reportedly shot back, "I can't spare this man, he fights." He had finally found his victor. His greatest political gamble, the Emancipation Proclamation, was also born from failure. For the first year of the war, his only stated goal was to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. But as the war dragged on and defeats mounted, he realized a purely political goal wasn't enough. The war needed a moral cause. Lincoln's assassination in April 1865 meant he would never see his vision for Reconstruction come to pass. His plans, which relied so heavily on his own moral authority and political skill, crumbled under his successor, Andrew Johnson. The failure to create a just and lasting Reconstruction would haunt the nation for a century. But Lincoln's ultimate legacy isn't defined by that unfinished chapter. His true victory wasn't just winning the Civil War, but how he won it. His greatness was never inevitable. It was earned through a relentless capacity to endure, to learn, and to grow from every single setback. The failed shopkeeper learned fiscal responsibility. The defeated politician learned patience. The grieving father and husband learned an empathy that shaped a nation. The story of Abraham Lincoln is not the story of a man who never failed. It is the story of a man who failed constantly, spectacularly, and painfully. And it's the story of how that man used the lessons of his own brokenness to heal a broken nation. He proved that true strength isn't the absence of weakness, but the courage to lead in spite of it. If you see history differently now, subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative.